Bob Siegel, come on up. Bob's been here before. He's been with us for several years. Good man. I'll give him the floor now.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you again. A lot has happened since I was last with you. It's been about a year and a half since I've been here, and not the least of which is that the Tea Party just continues to get a better and better reputation on the television and radio waves, doesn't it? Especially with objective networks like MSNBC and PBS and CNN. And I love how they respond every time there's a shooting. Where there was a shooting in Arizona, where there was a shooting at Sandy Hook, and of course, the recent, this time it wasn't a shooting, which means Obama's going to have to outlaw pressure cookers now. He'll do that before he'll start talking about Islamo-terrorists. But have you noticed that when there's a bombing, the first thing the media does is, let's not rush to judgment. Let's not rush to judgment. Once they find out that it was a Muslim radical. Well, okay, he was a Muslim, but I remember when that guy shot up Fort Hood. Remember Fort Hood got shot up? Guy was calling out Allah Akbar. My favorite, Geraldo Rivera. Well, maybe he did it because he had a toothache. When we know it's from an Islamo-Muslim, we're told not to rush to judgment. Maybe the religion had nothing to do with it. But when they don't know at all yet who did it, maybe it was the Tea Party. Have you noticed that? We don't know anything, must have been the Tea Party. Once we know it was a Muslim, well, now, let's not rush to judgment. One of my favorites was Michael Moore. I'm not a big fan on Twitter. I'm on Twitter because you have to be on Twitter these days. Michael Moore, on the first day, wrote 2 + 2 =, and then you had to wait in suspense. And an hour later, he wrote that what he meant by 2 + 2 is tax day plus Patriot Day. He's going to take you by the hand, okay, because we're stupid sheep. He's going to take you by the hand. Tax day plus Patriot Day equals what? Well, obviously it's a reference to the Tea Party, or if not the Tea Party, something right-wing, something patriotic. And if it looks like the Tea Party and smells like the Tea Party, must be the Tea Party. Wolf Blitzer, similar thing. This is right after the bomb went off. He says, well, it's a state holiday in addition to the Boston Marathon. It is a state holiday in Massachusetts today called Patriots Day, and who knows if that had anything to do with it. Oh, yeah, it's Patriots Day. The bomber must have been a patriot, right? But nobody can top Chris Matthews. If I put down this mic and just talk, do you think you guys might still hear me? I have a pretty loud voice, and I'm aware. Let me just try that. Can you hear me okay? I'm usually not accused of being too soft. Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, well then if you're recording, I'll try to use it. I usually use my hands a lot, so I'm a little hindered by this mic. Okay, anyway, Chris Matthews. He's my favorite. Here's the day that the bombing goes off, and this is the part about we don't know that it's a Muslim. Let's not rush to judgment. He says, well, Michael, tax day today, that came up, I was thinking of all the iconic events or being told about them today. Of course, I knew it was tax day because I got them in, but of course it's Patriots Day. It's also the Boston Marathon. And would you, as an expert, be thinking domestic at this point? I don't think tax day means a whole lot to the Arab world or Islamic world, or certainly not to Al-Qaeda in terms of their world. It doesn't have some iconic significance, does it? Well, he was close. Tax day doesn't mean a whole lot to the Muslim world. Conquering the countries that believe in tax day, that means a lot to the Muslim world. Patriots Day, Boston, that doesn't mean a lot to the Muslim world. Conquering them for Islam, that means a lot to the Muslim world. But then when we find out that they're Muslims, Chris Matthews comes on the next day. He goes, oh, why is that so important? Who cares? You getting this? Are you catching on just how incredibly stupid do they think the people of America are? Before we know who did it, sounds like the Tea Party. After we know who did it, and we know it wasn't the Tea Party, well, let's not rush to judgment. After all, Islam's really a beautiful religion, and it's just hijacked by a few nutcases. Okay, there are a lot of peaceful Muslims. There are. There absolutely are. But I'm telling you, I'm getting tired of these sanctimonious lectures about how peaceful Islam is every time there's violence in the name of Islam. Honestly, it's a peaceful religion. We can see where it may not always look that way. There are a lot of peaceful Muslims, but let me tell you something. The peaceful Muslims are not reading the Quran, because the Quran actually commands this jihad. The terrorists are reading it literally. The president of Iran is reading it literally. But again, Obama will outlaw pressure cookers before he'll do anything about this. At least one guy named David Sonoda on Salon.com was honest. He was just as biased. He hates the Tea Party just as much, but he was at least honest by telling us what he hoped it would be. He says, if you care about everything from stopping war to reducing the defense budget to protecting civil liberties to passing immigration reform, you should hope the bomber was a white domestic terrorist. Why? Because only in that case will privilege work to prevent the Boston attack from potentially undermining progress in those other areas. I don't know about you. I've been to many Tea Parties, not just this one. I don't see a lot of white males. I see white males. I see females. I see African Americans. I see Hispanics. I see Asians. I don't just see Republicans. I see libertarians. I've even seen some Democrats. In fact, I am a conservative Democrat. Don't worry, I haven't voted Democrat in eons, okay? And I've stayed in the party just to shake things up a little bit. But whenever somebody tries to shut me up, I go, we know what all you right-wing Republicans think. I go, I'm a Democrat. You see, it just helps with the conversation. Let's say abortion comes up. What, you're a Democrat and you're against abortion? Why are you against abortion? Don't you believe in the rights of women? Sure, I believe in the rights of all women, including baby women. You see, now we're having a conversation. But if I'm a Republican, Republican, nothing to even discuss. So that's why I'm a conservative Democrat. But don't let anybody sell you this baloney. I went to my high school reunion, and of course I went to high school. I graduated in 1972, which substantially dates me. And so people that graduate today because of Facebook, they can stay in contact with their friends for the rest of their lives. For those of us that graduated in 1972, it was quite a treat. I went to my high school reunion and saw people I hadn't seen in 40 years. And there was one lady there, her name was Pam, and we got along just great in high school. Not a girlfriend, but a bud, a pal. She still had her same sense of humor. I still had mine. We were joking, carefree. And then she made this comment about the Tea Party, how racist they are, how violent they are. Now, it's easy to say that in the abstraction, but when you know somebody and you have to look them in the eye, I put my arm around her. I said, $100 says you've never been to a Tea Party. She says, you're right. I said, okay, so look, maybe you should go to one first and then pop off about it later. You can believe whatever you want. I'm not here to tell you what to think, but at least know what you're talking about. She couldn't argue against that because she had to stare somebody right in the face. I have all kinds of friends that don't follow the news. Now, who can blame them? The news is depressing. I have to follow the news. I do a radio show. I do a column for digital communities at Washington Times. I have to follow the news. But I don't blame people who don't follow it. I will say this to people, though. If you're not going to follow the news, if you're not going to follow politics, please don't vote. You see, I am not a believer in get out the vote. People say, well, that's our sacred right. Yes, it is your sacred right. It is your sacred privilege. And for that reason, you have a sacred responsibility to not abuse it. I'll be honest with you. When I was in college, I was not following politics. I had recently converted to Christianity from a Jewish family, and I was studying the Bible. And as time went on, I realized the Bible, we're not going to be able to read it anymore if politics keeps going the way it is. So I had to take an interest in politics as well. But when I was in college, I didn't know jack diddly squat. I couldn't have told you the difference between a Republican or a Democrat. I couldn't have told you. But I was smart enough to do one thing. I stayed home on Election Day. And I'm glad I did because Jimmy Carter was running that year. And now that I know about Jimmy Carter, I'm glad I was willing to admit how ignorant I was. He was the worst president we ever had until... And that leads me to the other thing that's happened since we were last together. Obama was reelected as president. Oh, happy days are here again. He was reelected despite Benghazi, the lies of Benghazi, which frankly, compared to Watergate, make Nixon look like Gandhi. He was reelected despite all of his lies. He lied about health care. He lied about every single part of health care. He said the nationalized health care would not fund abortion. He lied. He said there would be no death panels. All right, well, technically he's telling the truth. See, there's no place where they call them death panels. Oh, there's panels, and they're from the government, and they're going to tell your doctor what kind of procedure he can do and what kind of procedure he can't do. And if you're not obeying their rules of staying healthy, if you're not kind of refusing to eat or drink the kind of things that brilliant people like Mayor Bloomberg tell us to eat or drink because they know so much better than we're just stupid sheep and they need to walk us by the hand, they'll tell you if you're a certain age, they'll say it's too risky. We've got to have our fair share. We've got to redistribute it. So no, Obama to this day will say there's no death panels in there. Oh, you're right, Mr. President. We don't have death panels. I'll prove it to you. We don't call them death panels. We just call them panels, which decide who's going to live and die. But they're not called death panels. So relax. He said your premiums would go down. Mine didn't go down. I had to get a new plan, which covers less, because I was going to go up another $100 a month. And that's not counting the other $100 that had gone up the year before. He said, if you like your doctors and you like the insurance you can have, you can keep it. He lied. Now, again, technically, if you want to look at this like a lawyer, yeah, he was telling the truth. You can keep your doctor. You can keep your insurance company as long as your doctor's still practicing, as long as your insurance company stays in business. Of course, we, the government, are going to strangle the insurance companies with regulations. We're going to tell your employer how many people he has to cover with his health care so that he's going to just hire less people. And now there's less people going into insurance companies, so they jack up the premiums. And now you can't pay the premiums, so you go to a cheaper company. And then they put them out of business. But like Mighty Mouse, here he is to save the day. They'll come in and we'll have an all single-payer government system. And he'll get up there and say, I tried. I didn't tell the insurance companies to go out of business. I told them who they had to cover, who they couldn't cover. I told them that their kids had to be 26 before they took them off their doles. But I didn't tell them to go out of business. They should have sucked blood out of a turnip and found the revenue somewhere. He lies through his teeth. Let me tell you what the problem was with the election. And I know hindsight is 20/20, but I was saying this before. I wrote an article for Washington Times a whole year before the election, and it was called Conservatives, Be Careful, Obama Could Win Again. Back then, everybody was saying, oh, never has somebody gotten reelected when the economy is this bad. Never. Yeah, and never did anybody get elected in the first place when he shamelessly said he believed in redistribution of wealth to Joe the plumber. Never did somebody get elected in the first place when he voted as a state senator against the Illinois Infant Protection Act, which, by the way, wasn't about abortion. It was trying to prevent infanticide. There's all kinds of things. There are all kinds of things we had on Obama. And any one of them would have killed another candidate or killed his campaign dead in its tracks. But because people were afraid that they'd be called a racist if they didn't vote for him, because he had charisma. You know, a person can have charisma and still not know what they're talking about. A person can have charisma and have an evil agenda. And that leads me to the places where Obama is not lying. I want to give credit where credit is due. There's one thing that he's told the truth about, and he's been very honest, and it's to his credit. He has said he wants to fundamentally transform America. He has said he wants a redistribution of wealth. He believes more in his ideology than he believed in getting reelected. And why did people reelect him? Because, if I may talk to my fellow Republicans and conservatives and libertarians, we're incredibly, incredibly stupid. What I was hearing was, man, just talk about the economy, but make sure you don't say anything negative about Obama himself. I don't have a problem with Obama as a person. I just have a problem with his policies. All right, somebody has to say it. I'll say it. I have a problem with Obama as a person. The man's values are not the same as our values. And I don't care what color he is. We're always saying, oh, the Tea Party, they only want the white kids. Really? Then explain how Herman Cain was so popular. Explain why we've rushed to the defense of Condoleezza Rice. and Alan West and this new fellow who's the doctor who's doing such a great job and got up there. Yeah, he's wonderful. And he had the audacity to do it with Obama sitting right there. Oh, well, they don't count. They're not really black. They're white people painted black. They're Uncle Toms. And these are the people that are calling us racists. If you're black, you have to be a Democrat or you're not really black. Oh, they don't believe somebody's character is motivated by their skin color, do they? Martin Luther King would be turning in his grave. He believed in a colorless society. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. What matters is your character. Obama's just done a crackerjack job. And not just domestically, but overseas. We have the best reputation in the world. In fact, people are so enamored with America that they've come up with special rules. Did you know that? The world has written some rules for America. People who aren't American citizens have written some rules for us, and they're hoping that people that they will call, for want of a better term, useful idiots, will follow these rules. And there are many politically correct people in America that love these rules, but the rules are made by other countries. And I'm going to state them informally, but as I read them, I think you're going to find them very familiar. Wish we had a drum roll, but if we did, I'd say, drum roll, please, the rules for America. Rule number 1, other countries are allowed to have borders. America is not. For us to have a border, that would be exclusionary, racist, and mean. Just wouldn't be nice. Rule number 2, other countries are allowed to have a national language. America is not. Do you think the people in France don't have a national language? Oh, but they like to talk about how racist we are because we have a national language. Have you ever found out what happens when somebody tries to get into Mexico from the other side of the border? They're southern, they shoot them. And then they give us sanctimonious, self-righteous lectures, but we need to be more inclusive. This would be a joke if it weren't so tragic. Rule number 3 in the rules for America. Countries that have their own language and borders, other countries that do have their own language and borders, are allowed to criticize America for wanting the same. They can call us racist for it, but should America challenge their double standard, that would just make us more racist than ever. I hope you're writing these rules down because they're so important. Rule number 4 for America. Where our single country is concerned, when you're just looking at America as a country, instead of celebrating our unity as Americans, we should celebrate our diversity of cultures. Instead of teaching about the melting pot, cultural diversity. However, moving to Rule 5, and this goes with it, this is very important, where the entire world is concerned, you should not care about the different cultures of the different countries, because then you might say something positive about America. So there's no melting pot in America as far as different cultures are concerned, but America itself, along with every other country in the world, should go and be part of a melting pot for the global village. Isn't that incredibly, incredibly consistent? Number 6, when a Republican or a conservative or a libertarian candidate changes his position, he is a flip-flopper. Rule 7, when a liberal changes his position, he is evolving. Number 8, when Republicans refuse to compromise and work with President Obama, they are being partisan. Number 9, when Obama refuses to work with Republicans, it's because he's a man of strong conviction, and he cannot compromise his conscience. Oh, and by the way, he's doing it for the American people. There's a couple of words I think we should retire. One of them is partisan. We need to just get rid of that word. I'm partisan. A partisan's just somebody who has strong convictions about something. I always love to change the scenario with my friends. I would go back to the pre-Civil War South. Was the North being kind of partisan because they had the audacity to impose their morality on the South? All the South wanted to do was keep slaves. And we know morality was on their side because the Supreme Court in the Dred Scott decision said it was okay to keep slaves. End of discussion, right? Who were we, the Republicans in the North, to impose our morality on the South? Doesn't that sound kind of creepy when you look at it for 100 years ago? How will future societies 100 years from now judge us? Are you being partisan? Democrats are never partisan. They're just Democrats. Liberals are never partisan. They're just liberals. When the Democrats lost the House and the Senate, and George Bush was president before Nancy Pelosi and her merry men came along, we were told by the Democrats, the American people want bipartisanship. We might be the minority party. Our voice is more important than ever because we're the minority party. Because there's less of us, we should be heard even more. See how the rules keep changing? What happened when they took back the House and the Senate? The American people have spoken. Republicans, suck it up. It's a democracy. That's the way it works. Democrats are never partisan. They're just Democrats. Maybe it takes a Democrat to admit that. Okay. Rule number 10. Liberals are more nuanced than conservatives. You ever notice that? When Obama was running against McCain, and McCain ran a lousy campaign, but still, we were hearing unfair things. Obama is educated. He's a scholar. Issues are complicated. They're nuanced. Yeah, let me give you an example of one of their complicated issues. Now, I don't care what your position is about abortion or same-sex marriage. I mean, I do care. I don't believe in same-sex marriage. I don't believe in abortion. I would not tell you as another American what you have to think. I believe we can have civil discussions. But I think where we can all agree is that we ought to be able to keep talking about that. We ought to be able to have a dialogue. Did you know they're trying to outlaw free speech? It's already going on in several countries in Europe. Did you know that in Canada, the two protected people groups you can't speak against? Muslims and homosexuals. There are Muslim countries that execute homosexuals. The others at least put them in prison or treat them as second-class citizens. So if it wasn't for the political correctness, which has been grandfather clause, if somebody were to try to look at this logically, they'd go to Canada and say, let me see if I can understand this. The two protected people groups are homosexuals and the group whose countries murder homosexuals. And we're not allowed to speak against either of those. This is insane. They're trying to do the same thing in America. Watch out for laws about hate speech and hate crime. You know, who's going to decide what's hateful? The Supreme Court? Nancy Pelosi? When I just think of men like Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and how they must be turning in their graves that our country's been given to the likes of Nancy Pelosi. And we have to pass the law to find out what's in it. We did this for the American people. That's the other thing we need to outlaw, the American people. I just say something else. Say American citizens, say we the people, but I just don't like the way politicians use that word. Well, Larry, I'm just doing this for the American people because we feel that's what the American, we've abused the term. We should retire it. Yes, I'm an American. I'm a proud American. I don't like the way politicians use the term the American people. And these nuanced arguments. If we say we're against same-sex marriage because we're a homophobe, if we didn't vote for Obama, it's because we're a racist. Oh, really? Couldn't be his policies? Couldn't have anything to do with that nightmare in Benghazi. Couldn't have anything to do with wealth redistribution. It's the nuanced people, the complicated people, the clever, educated people, the people that don't think like we simpleton conservatives. They're telling us only one possible reason to not vote for Obama, racism. I heard some dude from Great Britain get up and say that during the Grammy Awards before Obama was nominated the first day. And you Americans, here's your chance to not be racist. How many African-American prime ministers have they had in England? I lose track. And they're going to come over here and they're going to lecture us? Give it a rest. You don't like Obama? You're a racist. You don't like abortion? You're against women's rights. You don't believe in same-sex marriage? You're a hate monger. 10 years ago, they wouldn't have even said that. 10 years ago, they would have said, I don't agree with you. Times are changing. They wouldn't have called you a hate monger. There's an old saying, when a man stops believing in God, he'll start believing in anything. I believe in God. There's a lot of things I don't believe. I don't believe the life of a chicken is as important as the life of a human being. This puts me in serious odds with PETA, which put out a display at UCLA showing a photograph, a real photograph of a Nazi concentration camp with Jews behind barbed wire, and next to it, chickens behind a cage at a chicken farm. They called it the new Holocaust. Holocaust on a plate. Now, I'm sorry, somebody can tell me I'm irrational for believing in God, but let me tell you what I think is irrational. I just got to be honest with you. I get a lot of emotion about the Holocaust. I don't have much emotion about a bucket of Extra Crispy. Ditto for original recipe. Speaking of choice, when considering abortion, it's a woman's choice. We're the party of choice. Yeah, they're the party of choice, and that is the only choice in this world they think you can make. Do these people really believe your body is your own choice? Try smoking. Try taking a big gulp that's a bigger size than Mayor Bloomberg wants you to have. Try eating something with too much cholesterol. Well, you know, we're all part of the same healthcare system. Now, see, now it comes out. Too much salt. We're part of the same healthcare system. And so we've got to start mandating the kinds of things you eat and drink because we're all in this together. If you're going to expect us to pay for your healthcare, we didn't expect you to pay for our healthcare. We didn't ask you that. You forced it down our throats anyway. But now the spin is, if you're going to ask us to pay for your healthcare, then we're going to tell you how to eat. They don't believe for a second that a man or a woman is responsible for their own body. And even with abortion, people at Planned Parenthood have gone on record as saying we look to the days of China. There's no pro-choice in China. It is mandatory abortion after you've had one child. There's no choice about it. And I hear people say we should do that here. Did you know that Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, used to work with Adolf Hitler's eugenicist and allowed him to publish articles? Now, once the Nazi concentration camps were discovered, she distanced herself from them. The woman was a racist. She thought blacks were inferior. She thought Italians were inferior. She was a racist geneticist. And we portray her today as a proud heroine. And if we say something positive about the Constitution, that makes us fascists. Meanwhile, a real fascism is going on the other side. And when we water down things like the Holocaust by comparing it to a plate of chicken, we forget what the real Holocaust was all about. Before we bring up our speaker, I'll end with a fun illustration since we're talking about energy. Now, this happened in 2008, but I've never forgotten it. It's my favorite global warming story. Special outdoor global warming rally was planned in Australia. They canceled it because not enough people showed up. You know why they didn't show up? It was too cold outside. It was too cold. Is our guest speaker here yet?
Not yet.
He's not here yet.
We're going to take a break.
We'll take a break, and we'll get back together when our guest speaker arrives.
Before we do, earlier Jim was talking about becoming active with the local issues and such, the school board, and I'd like to point something out. I'll come on down front to address you. In this week's local paper and in the local online media, there has been a lot of misreporting. You've probably all seen the report that the teachers now are going to have to take an 8% cut this year and a 9.4% cut next year and the following year. You've all seen that story? The real story is that they will take about an 8% cut this year after their raise for the ones that were eligible, which was about 5% or so. Next year, though, there will be a 1.4% reduction, not 9.4. That 1.4 is in addition to the 8% they take this year. And then the following year, that same 1.4% additional percentage will continue. And then the year after that, guess what? Goes right back to where they were this year. You didn't see any of that. You also didn't see the pay reductions and the furloughing that the administration took this year. It's not being reported. The local paper, Patch, AOL, all the other services that we've got news coming out on these stories and local TV coverage, it's all being misreported. Talk to your neighbors about it. Tell them that this is false information. Cancel your subscriptions. Do whatever you can. Bombard the phone lines to them. Yes?
Everybody in the United States should read Brave New World in 1984 because that's what we're living today.
Yeah.
Let me respond to this the way my liberal friends would respond. Now, we just heard a very involved argument, and see what this conservative was really doing is he was trying to confuse you with the facts. Because we nuanced people know it's much more complicated. If teachers need a raise, they need a raise. End of discussion. You want to discuss it? You're a racist. You know, the problem is when they keep saying that, people believe it. My friends who I told you that they don't follow the news, they turn it on long enough to hear people always mention the Tea Party every time there's a shooting. And then, oh yeah, there's a retraction later, but the stallion's already gotten out of the corral. And they keep hearing Tea Party associated with violence. There's been none. And if some nutcase from a Tea Party did do it, wouldn't we all condemn it immediately? And then you compare that to Occupy Wall Street, where they're breaking down windows, where women are being raped, where they're holding anti-Semitic signs saying everybody on Wall Street is a Jew. And how do the liberals respond to that? Well, Larry, these young kids have a message for us, and I think what they're doing, I don't support all the violence, but this is good for the American people. Thank you. We'll take a break. Okay, gathered together. Our guest speaker is here, and I have the privilege of introducing him. So grab a seat, please. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce Alec Epstein. He's a graduate of Duke University, and he was a former fellow at the Ayn Rand Center. He's an expert on energy, industrial policy. He's written for all kinds of periodicals, including the very well-known Wall Street Journal. He does a podcast called Powerhouse. I like the double play on that. He's been on hundreds of radio and TV shows, and we're very honored. Please give a warm welcome to Alec Epstein.
Oh, thank you. All right, I apologize very much for being late. I will try to make it interesting as a payment. So I want to start out with a couple of stories that I think show the state of American energy, which is one of these forks in the road where you have, on the one hand, enormous peril, but also enormous promise. So if we go back to the year, these are really bright lights, by the way. I feel like a star. If you go back to the year 2007, when Barack Obama was campaigning for president, he gave a speech in Detroit where he announced one of the goals of his energy policy, and that was to, quote, end the tyranny of oil, unquote. And he said, the age of oil must end in our time, and he likened the oil industry to the tyranny of fascism and communism. So these are movements that killed over 100 million people in the 20th century. And in a better world, this would certainly disqualify a human being for dog catcher, let alone president. And unfortunately, he was elected, which doesn't just show his own views, but which shows the views of the public, not in the sense that they share his views, but that there's a lot of indifference toward the value of oil, and certainly a lot of hostility. So that's really the peril, that someone could take something that is, the lifeblood of our civilization. That's the way that all of us got here today. Most of our clothes are made of oil in one way or another. The only way we and 7 billion others can eat is oil-based agriculture. That someone could call that a tyranny is really scary, and impose policies. The promise, though, is that hasn't even remotely happened. And in fact, if we look at President Obama's most recent State of the Union address, well, what did he say about oil? What's that? He kind of said he's against it, but increased production. And who got the credit for increased production? President Obama. Now, in one sense, we can say, well, this is not a just or honest claim. But on the other hand, it's a lot better for the President of the United States to be saying that it's a good thing that we're producing more oil, instead of, my goal is to destroy the production of oil. So you've got these two sides, and then it raises the question, okay, well, it's the politicians and their ideas that are the threat, but what led to this promise? And I want to keep this fairly interactive. So who has any sense of how is it that we had this energy revolution so quickly? That wasn't even on the map in 2008 in the political discourse, and is now everywhere. Right.
then we get unfrozen, and then into their part where they can reduce that part of hell.
Yeah. I mean, this is.
We're frozen back into the tyranny of hell.
So I just want to separate. So there is the issue of what is the end game here, and that there's a question of in terms of yes. Oh, what she said. Okay, she raised this as an issue of Obama's following a strategy from Saul Alinsky in terms of that it's a strategic maneuver that belies his ultimate intent to be supporting this kind of thing. Which I think there's truth to that, but it's also true that we've had this revolution, whatever Obama's intentions, and we heard free market, and I think that really captures a lot of it. And I think it might be more helpful though. I like to think of it as energy liberation. And we're going to talk about energy independence, but I actually think energy liberation versus energy strangulation is the key energy issue of our time. So what is energy liberation? Well, energy liberation is the freedom to develop new energy resources on private property. Because private property is really key. The freedom to develop new resources using your own private property. And if we look empirically with the hydraulic fracturing revolution, so we can talk more about this later if anyone has any questions, but most of you are probably familiar with this basic dynamic where you have a form of rock, shale rock, that's almost solid, that was previously completely useless, and that for 100 years we knew that it had oil and gas in it, but we didn't have the technological resources to get it out. And thanks to human ingenuity, including a technology called hydraulic fracturing, we could crack it out and turn that useless rock into oil and gas bearing rock. And this has just been a revolution that has led to cheaper natural gas, which has done things like revive a lot of American manufacturing. And then with oil, it's arguably an even greater source of wealth in places like North Dakota, which now has an unemployment rate of 3%. But how did all of this happen? It certainly wasn't support from on high. We've seen that there was mass opposition from on high. But the nice thing is that whatever problems we have, America is still a nation that has a lot of private property. And what private property means is that no matter what someone else's brilliant scheme for your life is, you get to do what you want on your property. And so what many small oil companies even were able to do is say, look, we want to cultivate this technology, we want to develop it, and that's how they were able to refine the technology to just produce an enormous amount. But it's important that to the extent there hadn't been private property, to the extent we had a policy of the government deciding what sort of energy should be developed instead of free individuals, we would not have a hydraulic fracturing revolution. And if we look at Europe, and we look at the rest of the world, it's no coincidence that this revolution occurred in America, because it's not very well known, I think, but America has by far the best set of geological knowledge and most efficient drilling of any place in the world. If you look at how well explored our territory is, how deep our knowledge, there's nothing in the world to compare to it. And the reason is because we're the only country that has real energy liberation in terms of private property rights. So even if you go to a place like England or France or even in many ways Canada, you can't explore to the same extent. And that's why these countries are all so backward on things like shale. And you see even today places like France are saying, well, we shouldn't do this at all. And once they control all the raw materials for energy and they control the property, you can't do anything. So what I think this is, what this shows is that we have with energy liberation, unbelievable things can happen. But to the extent that energy strangulation is allowed, to the extent that President Obama or anyone else has control over what people do with energy resources on their own property, the prospects are just devastating. So I want to tell a couple more stories that illustrate how this has been a dominant issue for the last 30 years. So who in here remembers, and I can't raise my hand unfortunately, who remembers the Arab oil embargo of '73? So this gentleman here says it cost him his job. I mean, that was a very painful decade in many ways. I mean, you have a Republican president passing wage and price controls, as well as establishing all the so-called environmental organizations that helped freeze a lot of development. So interesting with the Arab oil embargo. So we have the piece of the puzzle. The most known piece of the puzzle is what OPEC did. You know, that's not, you know, we don't need to go into that. What's not as well known was the liberation strangulation dynamic, because in the 60s we had this amazing exploration mission by companies including ARCO in Alaska, where no one had been able to figure out how to find oil, and they spent, you know, I'm sure hundreds of millions of dollars and drilled what's called dry holes, you know, made many weren't able to find. And there's a guy named Robert O. Anderson who was just this very enterprising guy. And on this, I believe it was the seventh hole, he finally struck oil. And it was just the greatest gusher that we had ever had. So we had, and the more they explored, the more they found there was enough oil there to give, to produce 1.6 million barrels of oil a day. So that's about 100 million gallons a day if we do the math. I mean, a little less than that, more like 75 million gallons. And now what's interesting is how many barrels of oil a day were taken off by the Arabs in 1973? 1.6 million. So it would have been pretty handy to have this oil back then from Alaska, which you can control the security of more than you can, say, Saudi Arabia. So what happened? Well, the Nixon administration, among others, after they had not only found the oil, but after they had devised one of the greatest construction projects in world history, you know, 48-inch pipe to pipe this oil, you know, to the rest of the United States, figuring out how to keep it all stable and everything working, despite the fact that Alaska, you know, has a very rough winter, but then also the tundra gets soft. So all these amazing engineer problems, one of the greatest industrial projects in history. And then after the Santa Barbara oil spill of 1969, Nixon somehow thought that the fact that something can go wrong in a very rare instance offshore means that somehow you shouldn't build pipelines, which actually is pretty much happening now with people saying you shouldn't build a Keystone pipeline because BP happened. So what happened? Well, they just shut down the thing for 5 years. And during that 5 years, the Arab oil embargo happened. Now, to make matters worse, we had all kinds of price controls, and that we can talk about the economics of that later, but I just want to focus on liberation versus strangulation. So in effect, the Arabs do an act of strangulation, and the US had the potential to do an act of liberation and instead strangled our own energy supplies. So it's, you know, it's a big blow. It's a blow to prosperity. It's a blow to the security of our supplies. Yes?
One of the reasons that you're kind of young, so you didn't remember this. One of the reasons that we, at that point, our country entered into a really heavy borrowing stage, in which we borrowed money from Saudi Arabia, and they had an agreement they would buy our T-bills if we buy their oil. So we're locked into a contract, and that's one of the reasons we're so far in debt today.
Yeah, yes, I'm aware of that argument. I don't quite agree with it, but I mean, we would have. No, but there's an issue of, whenever you have an issue of, okay, there's a question of what happened at that moment in history, but then how much of the subsequent inflation of the debt can you attribute to that particular relationship with Saudi Arabia versus, say, the welfare state versus the emergence of certain, there's just a lot of dynamics in terms of the debt. But certainly there were a lot of problems with our relationship with. Well, that's, okay, but then that connects to, in part, not having energy liberation. So we've got two examples so far. We've got the present example, we've got this one, and I think it's worth talking about one other, which is nuclear power. Energy liberation versus energy strangulation in nuclear power. Because many in this room might know this history better than most, but I speak on a lot of college campuses and I debate a lot of environmental groups. And their number one rationalization for why they're against nuclear power, and you always ask, well, you think that the worst thing in the world is, to emit CO2, which is to exhale. You think that's bad for our machines to exhale, in effect. So wouldn't you support the leading technology that doesn't emit CO2, nuclear? And yet they're the movement that opposes nuclear the most. And they'll often say, oh, well, it's expensive, and it's too expensive. And this is a bad argument for many reasons. And I want to go into a little bit of one reason it's bad even today is because however expensive nuclear is, at least it works reliably, which is not true of solar and wind. So solar and wind are not useful technologies to power a society. At most, I kind of think of it like, you have a productive company like Apple, and imagine you brought in some really unreliable workers. If that was 1% of your workforce, you could handle it. But if it was 50%, the whole thing is going down in flames. And so that's what solar and wind are. They're an unreliable source, and as long as you have enough fossil fuels and nuclear in the network, you can get away with it, but it doesn't scale. Anyway, nuclear is really important because it's a really great technology that's been strangled. And in the 1970s, there's some really good research by Dr. Peter Beckman and Dr. Bernard Cohen, both of whom are unfortunately deceased, showing that in the 70s, when nuclear technology was still pretty early, it was already outcompeting coal with a higher degree of safety, let alone solar and wind, which are far inferior. It was already doing that. And if we look at the cost curve for nuclear, usually with a new technology, what happens to the cost over time? It goes down. What happened to the cost of nuclear? Went up. Yeah, so whenever this happens, we know that there's some sort of strangulation going on, because it's not as if the engineers are becoming stupid or the companies are becoming stupid. It has to be that something about the laws is stupid or even worse. And so what happened was that people who had a big fear of nuclear technology or who wanted to manufacture it, who think that it's wrong to split the atom, they created a lot of hysteria that was unwarranted, making people afraid of radiation, even though radiation is something like anything that in a very high dose can be dangerous, but in normal doses is not dangerous at all. And in fact, like we have a gentleman right here, sitting next to those two people, the radiation from the potassium in their blood is greater than you would get living next to a nuclear power plant. And statistically, this is the safest technology ever, and safest energy technology ever. And one other cool attribute of it is that because the energy in nuclear is so concentrated, it's 1 million times more concentrated than oil, which is the other most concentrated thing. Because of that, it just has enormous potential to produce large amounts of power very, very cheaply. But this potential was scuttled. Yes? How do you know I wasn't born in the late 70s? Well, I mean, not enough, but France and China would be the main. I mean, France, certainly, although they have a lot of, they allow it in a certain sense, but it's extremely, extremely regulated. So it has a strangulation element to it. Yeah.
I think nuclear power, personally, I'm not trying to get myself on. I think it's one of the greatest things ever invented, and we were just
Yeah.
stupid beyond belief. To switch over to all this other, I can't put a turbine in my backyard. It's going to spin fast enough to power my house.
Or consistently enough. And I think that's worth. I mean, that's exactly right. Just for the record, I was alive during 3 Mile Island, although I was not a commentator on it at the time. So anyway, but it's worth, I think, pausing on what this gentleman is saying in terms of how inaccurate, but particularly the point about cars is a very, very valuable point, because it's a very common device to make the following kind of argument. X is imperfect, therefore X should be illegal. So X is imperfect, therefore X should be illegal. So they'll say, well, look, it's possible for drilling a well to go wrong, therefore no one should drill any wells. And notice this argument is never applied consistently. For example, so it's only applied to oppose things the person wants to oppose. So for example, if we take solar and wind, these are supposedly clean, but what are they made out of? No one ever discusses that, and how are they made? They're not just, the sun doesn't just come sort of jump into your iPhone directly, and even then, what's your iPhone made of, and how is it made? So there are mining processes which can go wrong, and it just happens to turn out with solar and wind, they're extremely hazardous mining processes, because with something like oil, you're dealing with, oil is ultimately a plant-based substance, which is not particularly toxic. The materials you're dealing with in solar and wind are extremely high toxicity, and you're mining them, and there's a lot of hazards. So the point is not that shouldn't be allowed, but it's showing that this argument is not a genuine argument. It's just a means of smearing things that people are opposed, and we have to be on the lookout for it and never let them get away with it's imperfect, therefore it should be illegal. And it's a similar thing with, have you heard the idea of dirty energy? Like oil is dirty, or coal is dirty. It's not true at all. It's not. What does it mean to call it dirty? That something, first of all, hippies who use this term, I thought they loved dirt in the first place. But even if it is not that, the idea is that it's unhealthy, or that there's some sort of health hazard. But that's true for every kind of energy. Every energy involves waste. So it's just a smear term to oppose the sorts of energy they want to oppose. Now, you can say that a form of energy is cleaner, but coal is not dirty. Coal today, modern coal technology, is one of the cleanest and healthiest sources of energy ever devised. So the fact that something else might be a little cleaner doesn't mean that coal is dirty, any more than you would say, well, you shouldn't be able to drive your car because a Mercedes S-Class is 5% safer, so you drive an unsafe car. No, these are all the modern sources of technology are amazingly beneficial, and they're healthy, both because they emit a remarkably low amount of waste, but the main thing is because the energy they provide is so valuable. And this is why in a place like China or India in the last 30 years, you have life expectancy increases of around 7 years, even though they have tons of pollution problems, because the value of having electricity and more broadly energy in your life is so high that it outweighs everything else. So with all of these examples, I just want to highlight. So first we had the fracking example, or the shale example, and then we had the nuclear example. Then we had the Alaskan pipeline example, and now we have the nuclear example. And can anyone else think of any examples we face today of a strangulation versus liberation alternative? Okay, so natural gas, and particularly fracking technology. Carbon dioxide. I'll get to that in a second. You were saying?
How do you get around I think the government, with the environmental Nazis, and that's what I refer to them as, you can't do anything. They're trying to tell us now you got to use a certain light bulb. You're only allowed to use a certain amount. In other words, they're telling us what we can and we can't do, even on private property. How do you get around the government regulation in California? I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, no, I mean and California is much more of a California is a leader in energy strangulation, although they like to put it otherwise. You mentioned, did you have another one? Oh, okay. So CO2, I think, is sort of the biggest rationalization for strangulation right now, because as actually talking to one of my colleagues on the way here, because he's a physicist and an economist, and we were talking about. It's interesting how historically the left always has a reason to hate capitalism. And when one reason dies, another reason emerges. So it used to be that capitalism was bad because it couldn't produce as much wealth as communism would be able to produce. Communism was going to create all this wealth. So what happened there? Well, communism destroyed wealth, and worse, destroyed people. And so what did they say? Did they say, well, we admit that capitalism is good. This is the ideal. We should pursue it. Maybe there are laws that can be improved here and there, but overall capitalism is a really good thing. Unfortunately, some did. Some changed their minds, but most didn't. So they found another reason to oppose capitalism, and the main one is environmentalism, which is really the idea that capitalism, so before it didn't produce enough, and now it produces too much. As in, it's wrong to develop. We're developing too much. We're creating too many roads. It's unsustainable. The earth, Mother Nature only gave us, so much potential for skyscrapers and driving. And, once we drive too many miles. What's that? And so that's a lot of how it's disseminated. Now, but the only way this kind of thing can stick is if you show someone that, well, there must be some mortal threat. Because if you just say, hey, it's a bad idea to build a new house or to use a good light bulb that doesn't make everything look blue, no one's gonna really follow that. But if you say, unless you use this light bulb that makes everything look blue and might, hurt you with mercury poisoning, unless you do this, the whole world is going to end. That's a stronger argument. And with CO2, what you have is since fossil fuel power is 87% of the power in the world, since it's everything, and since CO2 is therefore a part of every single process in our life, thankfully it is, then every single process in our life, if CO2 is bad, is up for control. So it's a very, very convenient thing to do. And if you compare it to something like the ozone layer, the ozone layer was, okay, you can't use this kind of spray can, and there's a lot of pseudoscience there too, but this is, in general, people who don't like capitalism want the most overarching problem with capitalism possible. And at first it was just a market and property rights. Socialism and communism said no market, no property rights, but then those were vindicated, so now they need to say, well, okay, you can have a market and property rights as long as that means that you're not allowed to emit CO2, which means you can't do anything you would want to do to live. Yeah, you can't exhale. Yeah, so there's a lot of elements, but I think so. We've got this policy of if we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we get liberation versus strangulation? CO2 is the biggest, and right now it's part of the fracking argument. So when people oppose fracking, it's not just groundwater, because once you refute groundwater, they just say, oh well, it emits CO2, so we shouldn't use it. And with oil in general, part of the reason President Obama calls it a tyranny is because, well, it's a tyranny of emitting CO2, which is also plant food, into the atmosphere. And so I want to, in terms of what I want to sort of move to, what do we do about this? How do we promote liberation versus strangulation? What's that? School choice. Well, certainly there's a lot of avenues. So one is you want an educational system that's not centrally indoctrinating everyone with an establishment view. But I think one thing, I'll just tell you one thing we've been focusing on at Center for Industrial Progress is not letting the other side pretend that they have an environmentally superior view. So a lot of the reason the CO2 view persists and these other views persist is because it's viewed that they have what they're after is a really healthy environment. Like they're going to make the world a really clean, wonderful place to live. And if we like coal and oil and natural gas and we want to be free to use our own kind of light bulb, we somehow just want to defile, our surroundings. And absolutely nothing could be further from the truth. If we want to talk about unhealthy surroundings, the first thing we have to talk about is undeveloped nature, which are some of the unhealthiest surroundings you can imagine. So before we had modern development, if you go back 300 years or if you go 5,000 miles to an undeveloped country, do they have a better environment than we do or a worse environment? Much worse. Why? Because nature doesn't, the environmentalists promote what I call the Disney view of nature. So the rest of nature is just our friend and it's harmonious and we're just messing everything up and polluting. But nature is full of amazing potential, but that potential can only be actualized by cleaning it up a lot, by getting rid of mosquitoes with malaria and draining swamps, but also not just getting rid of threats, but also nature doesn't give us too many resources. So we have to turn all the materials of nature, we have to turn that black glop in the ground into oil fuel that we can actually use. So I think the whole way we think about environment needs to be changed. We need to think of improving the planet through development for humans instead of saving the planet from humans. So it's improving the planet for humans and saving the planet from humans. And we need to be scientific about this. And so if someone says, well, CO2 is making it worse, well, there's two things. First of all, they'd have to show the CO2 was so bad that it outweighed all the benefits of coal and oil of natural gas. But what it turns out, if we look at, here's a question. I never hear anyone ask this. Are we safer from the climate than we were 100 years ago, or are we in more danger from the climate? Because everyone supposedly cares about the climate. We're much safer. In the last 80 years, we've gotten 50 times safer. 50 times. Why? Exactly. So climate is rendered progressively irrelevant by technology. So the number one key to climate safety is technology, and fossil fuels are the fuel of technology. And this is what, for example, take something like drought, which is the worst kind of climate-related problem because you starve if it doesn't get alleviated. There's always going to be lack of moisture where you want it. But what oil allows is when you have a crop failure, instead of just having a life failure, people dying, you can transport it via oil. So now we have, in effect, an internet of food around the world where you can move food to where it's present to where it's absent. And as a result, in the last 80 years, we've had a decline in drought-related deaths by 99.98%. So if someone says, I care about climate and I hate fossil fuels, they're either being dishonest or they're very misinformed about the actual relationship. So we could talk about how much warming has there been, is that bad, is there any man-made contribution, but ultimately, what we know is that all of that is so outweighed by the positive of fossil fuels it doesn't really matter. There's no evidence of any sort of net negative problem. And I'm sorry? Well, so I mean, the narrative I'm trying to say is that there's a policy choice that we're straddling right now: liberation versus strangulation. Fossil fuels are the primary energy, so if you have liberation, they're going to dominate. And there's this one huge argument against them, which is they're bad for our environment. So I'm trying to stress that if we're to promote liberation, that argument needs to be addressed head on. Because if everyone thinks the world is going to end because of fossil fuels and their environment is going to be ruined, it doesn't work. And there's no reason to concede that because it's completely false. The opposite is true. So I want to take questions in about 2 minutes. Let me just say one thing about energy independence, since I know that's the title of the talk, myth or reality. And my view is both a myth and a reality, but really I don't think it's the clearest way of thinking about things. If you think about energy independence, it kind of implies that we're producing all of our energy here. Like all the energy that we use is produced in the United States. But for that to be really true, not only would we have to produce all of the energy, enough energy for everyone, of all the different kinds, we'd also have to forbid export. And to really be, quote, energy independent, we would have to produce all the components of energy. Like you'd have to produce all the steel, otherwise you're not, quote, energy independent. You'd have to produce all the computers. So there's something wrong with it. And the thing that's wrong with it is what we're really concerned about is not do we produce every bit of energy or every component of energy, it's do we have a secure energy supply? And the way to do that is energy liberation in two ways. One, if you liberate your domestic production, you can, if anything really goes wrong on the international scene, you can ramp things up. But if your president is trying to end the tyranny of oil, your energy security is going downhill. But by the same token, part of energy liberation is you want to be free to import energy, and particularly from good places. So when we had Hurricane Katrina, it was a really big benefit to be able to import energy. And right now we have a big chance to import energy from where? Canada. That's being opposed. So what President Obama is basically saying is he's anti-energy liberation in both ways, because he wants to prevent us as individuals from benefiting from Canadian oil, from importing it, and he wants to prevent us from producing oil here. And in that sense, it can sometimes be good. Part of the problem with energy independence is you're dependent on your president. You're dependent on the leadership, because if everything is being produced here with the government in control, then what if it's a really bad government? So one of the nice things is if we're energy liberated, then we have to compete on a world market, and it's harder for someone to just prevent us from using oil. So I think that's really what we want to fight for. We want to fight for energy liberation, and that means everyone should be free to develop energy however they judge best, as long as they're not violating anyone's rights. And President Obama should have no say about it. And if someone claims that there's some pollution problem, they need to be able to prove it using science, not pseudoscience. Well, since I got clapping, let's take questions.
Earlier that stick that right in my face. That the way our country is designed, we can own property and we can do what we want with our properties. That's not true, especially in California.
You mean it wasn't designed that way, or it's not true that way today?
It's not true that way today. I mean, you can't go out and do whatever you want with your property. I can't drill a well on my property without going through the government agencies to say, here's a permit and I'm giving you permission to drill that well. And what Obama has done, if he gets, I agree with what you say, that he's trying to control. And what he'll do is come around the other way and put rules and regulations out there so you can't do it. You can't drill. I'm for it, he'll say. That's a good idea. But then underneath he throws these little loopholes out there that you can't drill. I know on my property, well, George just mentioned something earlier about a flagpole. You couldn't put a flagpole up without getting permits.
Yeah, I think that's a great...
You can't do what you want to do.
Well, yeah, I think that's a great clarification in this sense. Relatively speaking, so relative to what America used to be, we've had an enormous degradation in property rights. But relative to the rest of the world, we have a very stark presence of property rights. And what's compromising it is, in many ways, these agencies created by Richard Nixon. where what you have is really a form of fascism, where you allegedly own title to your own property, but if the government says, well, my priority is the snail darter. So if there's a snail darter on your property, well, it's not your property, or it's your property, but you have to use it the way that we say. And you're right that as a result, a lot of the freedom to use property is dependent upon the regulatory regime, which is bad for many reasons, including that it's constantly changing from administration to administration. So part of the quest for energy liberation has to be repealing those laws that violate property rights, and that's a big part of our focus.
Getting more involved in local governments and local municipalities, because what happens, and I'm much older than you, what happens is you give any board, any government agency free will, they'll tell you what they're doing for the people. What it really boils down to is their thinking. I don't want that next door to me. So it's not for the people, it's their upbringing, their thinking mechanism. And it's, we have too much of that, and we have too much government control in all phases. From, we were talking earlier about our water district, and the county and the city of San Diego, and I was on the legislative boards in Sacramento, and I saw a lot of that going on.
Yeah, let me address the issue. So I want to talk about control for a second, because I have a different view of it, I think, than some people. It's when you meet a lot of these bureaucrats in person, there is a definite desire that they have for control and for being busybodies over people's lives, and that's a real dynamic. But I think it's important that no matter what their motivation, they have no right to make decisions violating my property rights in the name of, quote, the people. There's no such thing as the people. There are individual people, and we each have a right to our own lives. That's what the Declaration of Independence says, and it's correct in saying so. So no one has it's as soon as you start talking about, I'm going to make this decision for the people. If I say I'm going to make this decision for the people in this room, well, yeah, it's a collectivist view. There's no the people. There's each one of you, with your own desires and how you want to spend your day. And what if I say, well, I'm going to make a decision for the people that I'm going to bar those doors for the next 5 hours and give you 5 more hours of lecture about energy? There might be one person who wouldn't mind that. Many people would for sure mind that. And the point is, it's not my right to control anyone's life. And as soon as you allow someone to define what the people is, it just means you're sacrificing some to others.
How do you get around the ignorance level of the average person walking around? I'm not trying to be critical, but I homeschool, and I talk to Greenpeace Kool-Aid drinkers. I talk to anybody that's willing to talk, and I try to keep it nice. But when you said, well, they have the argument the world's going to end, who, unless they have an IQ of 3, is going to actually, drink that, or buy that? It's ridiculous. The stupidity factor, it's almost like it's contagious all of a sudden. How do you get around educating? Because you're young. Don't say you're not young, because you are compared to most of the people in this room. But how do you inform people? How do you get them to actually believe what they're being taught, what they're being told is absolutely unadulterated, hooey?
So I don't know if the organizers event, this event, have an email list, but I hope they'll send out our website, which is industrialprogress.com. And we have a newsletter, and we also have a lot of resources. And I think one of the things we've been a pioneer in is how to motivate people to really learn about this stuff. I was giving a talk to the Canadian oil industry 2 weeks ago, and the topic came up of, it always comes up, where everyone is energy illiterate. How do you make people literate? How do you make people care? And one of the ways is you need to make it part of a really important goal. So energy liberation and progress has to be an important goal that we are, it's not just it's under threat, but it's something that we should be excited about, something that should be positive, and we should look at the companies who produce energy as heroes. And it should be something fascinating. I mean, I remember the other night for various reasons, I was in Las Vegas, of all places, which I don't go to very often at all. And I was just talking to some random person who you would think was a ditz, like a cocktail waitress. And I got her fascinated by oil for 30 minutes, like on the edge of her seat, understanding how oil moves the world, how all these products are made of oil, how that's possible, what a hydrocarbon is. It's because I was telling the story the right way. So I can't go into all the details of that, but it's very important for it to be a positive in the same way the environmentalists make their movement seem like a positive. But their movement is not a positive at all. It's not about going hiking or, cleaning up a park. It's about destroying capitalism. And if we make capitalism a positive and we have enthusiasm for it, and this existed much more in decades where, as everyone will point out, I was not alive, but I can still see the movie reels. If we get that kind of enthusiasm, that attracts people, and then they want to learn about it. In the same way they might want to learn about an iPhone. But they're not going to want to learn about something if the environmentalists are defining it as immoral, and then the industry is defining it as boring or unimportant. Yes.
Okay, I have 5 thoughts, and they may not seem to be regarding what you're talking, but I think they are.
Okay.
And they may not seem to be connected, but I'm thinking of the Constitution and our Declaration of Rights as a contract, a covenant, a treaty with the people. I'm thinking of property rights in connection with our Constitution and that covenant. I'm thinking of the environmental movement and Van Jones thinking that we need to turn things from working from the inside out, and environmentalism being used as a tool to change the way things work in America. And I'm thinking of, has anybody thought, if CO2 is so bad, if we eliminate CO2, what are we going to have? And then thirdly, I'm thinking of a thing called I think it's the Anthropic Principle. I may mispronounce that, but it is the principle that the earth was created to support mankind. And if you change any part of that, one way or another, the least bit, you're not alive, honey. Now, none of those things may be connected because of my mind. I have this screwy mind, and I didn't graduate from high school, and I'm just an ignorant housewife, quote, unquote. But think of that. Just think about that.
Okay, well, I want to comment mostly on the last one. I mean, definitely I'm a big supporter of the Declaration, and but this anthropic, I don't usually hear it put that way, but it's related to what I call the Disney view of nature, which is just that we have the planet is just in this perfect harmony, or sometimes it's called a delicate balance, and man is this unnatural presence that's messing everything up. So first of all, there's no delicate balance. It's kind of like the planet it's a ball and it's standing on this thing, and if I just kick it a little bit, it's going to fall off, and it's not how anything works at all. It's just the planet is a system. It's just a continually changing system. People talk about climate change. Climate change is a constant. There's no climate change as a problem. It's a constant. And even man-made climate change is a constant in the sense of every act we do affects the system in some way. So the only question is there a big problem with the way we impact the system? And the answer is all the evidence is not at all. In fact, there's a big benefit to the way we act. We act in the system. That's why we have a life expectancy of 80 and not 30. So it's simply the thing that man can adapt to is all kinds of changes, whether man-made or usually just the rest of nature in the world. We know that. Right. We know that modern civilization, we in America, we're the masters of climate change. We just don't know it. Look at where we live. Where do we live? We live in Southern California. What would this be like without industrial development? Yeah, I was in Las Vegas. That's even worse. But yet we can also live in Alaska, right, which is just freezing cold all the time. We can live in the swamps of Florida. We can live anywhere and expect to live to 80 precisely because we're such a versatile animal, because we're an animal that can adapt very well and can adapt the rest of the world to ourselves. Now, there's one thing that we know from history we cannot adapt to, and that, well, there are several things, but among them are lack of energy and lack of freedom. Right? There has been no life expectancy of 80 or anything close to it with lack of energy and lack of freedom. All of these came with the Enlightenment, and particularly the American Constitution and the Industrial Revolution. So what we know is that without modern energy and technology, which are made possible by freedom, life as we know it is impossible. So when people worry about how is the climate going to change, that's not what I worry about. I worry about how the political climate is going to change, because that's the only thing that can destroy us.
To digress just a little bit, you were discussing the, and this has to do with national, or with our resources and conservation therein, but public agencies. I don't even want to touch San Diego Gas and Electric. I don't even want to go there. But an example is the abuse that we, the ratepayers, are taking from the water districts. Here's not too long ago, the Padre Dam Municipal Water District, which is one of our larger ones, went on a conservation program, urging people to save water, save water, save water. Well, it worked. It not only worked, but they lost an extremely large amount of their revenue. So the only thing they could do was start charging rate holders exorbitant fees, and I understand that's a big problem here in Ramona. When you convert, and I've just heard a lot of horror stories, but I don't understand how these quote-unquote governmental agencies can have the power to ask you on one hand to conserve, and on the other hand says you did too good a job, now we need to charge you for it. Well, that's why I made
But so there, I mean, water is an interesting issue, but my view is there are ways of having it, at least substantially, being private, and then you don't have that issue at all. Because if you have privacy and multiple options, if someone tells you something as ridiculous as, my goal is for you to use less of our product, which is what they're saying, right? You should use less of our product. And then we're going to charge you much more. So we're going to give you less value for more money.
Now is as related to wells, like Jim said, you've got to jump through a lot of hoops to drill a water well. Well, they're even entertaining an ordinance by which you would be charged for the water that you pull out of the well on your own property. And this is already in place and being done.
Actually, it's more along the line of where we've used the word stupid and all kinds of things on ignorance, but one of the biggest tactics that this kind of government thinks about is exactly information needed to make a proper decision is forbidden. There will be no television programs like Omnibus or Science or anything else that gives accurate information. You are not allowed to have information. And the collective people vote absent the information. Lack of truth, lack of knowledge on the part of the government against us is the bottom line. We will not survive this unless we impeach.
Well, yeah, I don't think I can help with the impeachment thing in any immediate way. But let me talk about the issue of information, because someone mentioned schools earlier, and this is just such a fundamental problem of you have. I mean, it's similar to with the Soviets. You had the central control of the economy, and here you have the central control of the mind, which is in some ways worse, where you have a monopoly created by the government, and on high they decide what views are good and what are bad. And unfortunately, this really anti-human, anti-industrial idea of environmentalism is just spread everywhere. And I'm young enough to have been exposed to a lot of it when I was a kid. Fortunately, I came to other conclusions, but not everyone was so fortunate. But one positive, so the educational system is a mess and needs to be just, restructured or blown up or whatever. But one really good benefit we have right now is we can disseminate information much, much more efficiently and go around the system and the establishment through the internet. And that's an advantage we did not have in anywhere near the same way 20 years ago. So when I say, the most important thing is you have to figure out what information do you think is really important and is presented in a way that's going to move hearts and minds, and you should disseminate that in the same way that communists used to disseminate pamphlets. And I think at our website, industrial.com, we've got a podcast that has influenced a lot of people. We have a lot of material, so I invite you to check that out. And I hope you disseminate it and stay in touch. But no matter what, as an American who cares about the system, use this opportunity. Find what you think is the best information that will move hearts and minds and disseminate it, because it's never been easier to do that. There's no big 3 TV networks anymore. Everyone's on the internet. Obama's on the internet. He's got a Twitter. I mean, there's such a leveling of it, and we need to take advantage of that at the same time that we work to liberate the school system. So with that, everyone's been a great audience, and I'm happy to talk to anyone afterward.